Rav Kook. Last week we were talking about the Rav Kook in the Or HaTorah, using Rav Tzvang Yidrori, the Meir Vesim Shana, using his Pirush on Rav Kook's Or HaTorah. So last week we were reading from the Or HaTorah. Rav Kook began last week by writing, he quoted a medrash in Parshas Bereshis, Uzahav ha'oretz ha'hitov. The gold of the land is good. And the medrash there says, Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael. There's no comparison to the Torah that's learned in Eretz Yisrael. That's the Pashup Pshat in the medrash. There's something very special about Torah that's learned in Eretz Yisrael that cannot be accomplished in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, and Rav Kook, many before him, and we brought down a Gemara in Sanhedrin last week on Daf Chaf Daled, that when the Medrash says there's nothing like the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, the Pashut Pshat, there's no Torah like the Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And we have sources for that. The Gemara in Baba Basra and Daf Kuf Nun Ches Amud Beis, as an example, the Gemara says, Avira de Eretz Yisrael machkim. The air in Eretz Yisrael makes you smarter. The Gemara there says that an Amora had a certain position in a halacha while he was in Bavel. And when he came to Eretz Yisrael, he changed his position. And the explanation for why he changed his halachic position after he got to Eretz Yisrael, he said, Avir de Eretz Yisrael machkim. I came to Eretz Yisrael, the air here made me smarter, and now I changed my mind. What I said in Bavel was incorrect, and now because of the benefit I have of breathing in the air or living in the air of Eretz Yisrael, I realize that the halacha is different than what I said. So we say, Pashup Pshat, Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael. That's a medrash. There's no Torah like the Torah that started Eretz Yisrael. What does that mean? Because Torah in Eretz Yisrael is understood better. It's understood better because Avira Eretz Yisrael machkim. Other Mefarshim, and Rav Kook follows on their lead, Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael. Torahs Eretz Yisrael is sort of an adjective. There is no Torah like the Torah Eretz Yisrael. Not that's no Torah like the Torah you study in Eretz Yisrael. There's no Torah like the Torah that's studied according to the derech of Eretz Yisrael. The way Torah, it's a different derech. We learned the Gemara last week in Sanhedrin, Daf Chaf Daled, quoted in the Bavli. The Bavli is talking about a pasuk in Zechariah, Noam, Chovlim, people who are aggressive, and for us they Chovlim, quote unquote, a terrorist. Chovlim, Chavola, people that are aggressive and hurt other people. And then there's people called Noam, pleasant. And Zechariah was told to take two sticks in his hand. One stick was going to be called Chovlim, and one stick will be called Noam. The Gemara in its discussion says, what are these sticks? And the Gemara says, and this is the Gemara in Bavli. The Bavliim are basically quoting something about themselves. The Chovlim, the aggressive, I don't want to say terrorists, the aggressive folks are Talmidei Chachamim in Bavel. And Rashi explained to us that the Talmidei Chachamim in Bavel had a very aggressive style of learning, very aggressive with each other. On the other hand, the Gemara says that the Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael were Noam. They also studied with each other, but they did it drachel darchinom. They did it in a very pleasant way. So there were two derech halimuds. There were two styles of learning. There was Torah's Bavel. We're not talking about the Torah that is studied in Bavel. We're talking about the Torah that's studied in the style of Bavel. And then there's the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, which can mean Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael. Or Torah's Eretz Yisrael can mean the Torah that's studied in the style of Eretz Yisrael. So that's taking the lead of other Mefarshim. Rav Kook follows on this idea. When the Medrash says, Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael, there's no Torah like Torah's Eretz Yisrael. On one level, it can mean there's no Torah like the Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael, okay? Because the air makes you smarter. Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael can also mean there's no Torah like the Torah that's studied in the style of the Talmidei Chacham Eretz Yisrael, which was Derech Noya. And that's what we talked about last week, the different styles of learning Torah. And B'derech Klal, Rav Kook was talking about Torah's Eretz Yisrael is a Torah's Chayim, because here we get to live. We understand that there's a different thing happening here. Now, there are a lot of ways to explain this. And the simple way to explain it is there are certain things that you learn in Eretz Yisrael that you understand are life. You can't live life without learning this. So, for example, Truma, Maisrus, Shemitah, Shvius. This is not study and then put in the back of your head. This is, as we started learning yesterday, Oitzer Bezdin. When does Shemitah start? Habar Leinu L'Toiva. We're living here. We cannot learn Shavias for an intellectual function. I need to learn Shavias to be serious about it. I'm going to walk into the makolet. There are fruits and vegetables. There are going to be bottles of wine that say Oitzer Bezdin. Now, I need to either be familiar with the halacha or I need to ask someone who's familiar with the halacha, but I'm now living the halacha. Let's go back a step. We spoke earlier, we were talking about Bereshis, the first Rashi in Chumash. Rashi asks, why do I need all these stories? Just go straight to Chodesh Elochem. Answer, because you need to know that Eretz Yisrael was given to you and belongs to you forever. Is that a deflection? Deflection. I asked you, why don't you start with Torah mitzvahs? And now you're telling me that God created the world and I need to know that Eretz Yisrael is mine, so that the Goyim can't take it away from me. What does that have to do with mitzvahs? So now we're getting into the depth of this concept. You need to know that Eretz Yisrael is yours because that's the location, as we said earlier in the Bereshit Shir. The location for Shmiras Torah and mitzvahs is in Eretz Yisrael, and in Chutz Eretz Yisrael, it's Atzivi L'Chtzion. That's what the Ramban says. So now we're getting deeper into this. Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael. There is no Torah like the Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael on that level, because the Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael is the Torah that's going to be the living Torah. It's not I'm learning Shemitah because I just like to know Shemitah. I'm learning Shemitah because I need to live it. I need to know how to take off Trumas and Maisrus. I have a garden, I have a tree, I need to take off Trumas and Maisrus. Now, it's true that if you're in Chutz La'aretz, you have to learn Hilchos Tefillin. In Chutz La'aretz, you have to learn Hilchos Shabbos. If you're in Chutz La'aretz, you have to learn Hilchos Tzitzis. We go back to the Ramban. That learning of Tefillin, Tzitzis, Mezuzah, etc., is learning to do a mitzvah of Hatzivi L'Chatziyonim. I'm learning so I know how to perform a mitzvah so that when I go back to Eretz Yisrael, I won't forget how to do the mitzvah. That's a completely different mitzvah and a completely different learning. I'm learning Hilchos Tefillin in Eretz Yisrael because I want to know how to put on Tefillin in Eretz Yisrael. That's different than I'm learning how to put on Tefillin in Borough Park. That's just the way it is. I'm learning Hilchos Tefillin in Borough Park. I'm learning how to put on Tefillin in Borough Park. And why do I put on Tefillin in Borough Park? So that when I go back to Eretz Yisrael, I shouldn't forget what Tefillin is. If I didn't put it on for 2,000 years, I wouldn't know what Tefillin is. So Baruch Shalom says, what I'm saying is a Rashi. It's a Rashi in Parshas Eikev. It's a Ramban. When you go back to Eretz Yisrael, it'll be 2,000 years. You're not going to know what Tefillin is. Yankala put on your Tefillin for 2,000 years. So Yankala studies Hilchos Tefillin. He puts on his Tefillin for 2,000 years. When he comes back to Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, he's putting on Tefillin in the place where it was meant to be put on. And Baruch Hashem, he didn't forget it for the 2,000 years before he came back to Eretz Yisrael. So, Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael means that there's no Torah like the Torah that's studied in Eretz Yisrael on that level. Because here it's Torah's Chayim. You're going to live it to do the mitzvah which needs to be performed here. And it's also on the level, Ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael, there's no Torah like the Torah that's studied in the style of Eretz Yisrael. Because when you're learning the style of Eretz Yisrael, Rav Drovi explained to us, you're learning a different style. When the Torah is ideas, we fight about ideas. And we want to understand, or we want to get to whose idea is right. So we get to this idea of learning derech disputes, learning derech proofs. I can prove you wrong, I can prove you wrong, I can prove I'm right. That's a style of learning. But when the learning becomes really day-to-day practical, I need to know, what do I do right now? I'm not interested right now in this back and forth dispute, right, wrong, I can prove from here and I can prove from there. Just tell me. I need to live this right now. So this is, as I say many times, this is man in search of truth. This is not man in search of victory. This is not, I want to prove that I'm smarter than my chavrusa. I understand the sugya better than my chavrusa. I learned to Rabbi Akiva Eger that my chavrusa missed. This is about two people sitting down, or a group of people sitting down and saying, I live in Eretz Yisrael. I must know how to do the mitzvah properly here, because this is the place where it's done. So let's learn together pleasantly, because we all need to do this in the right way. That's Noah. This only is possible in Eretz Yisrael. This is called Toras Eretz Yisrael. Unfortunately, while it is possible only in Eretz Yisrael, this derech halimud, unfortunately, as Rav Kook writes in other places, when Yidden came from different parts of the world here, they brought with them their derech bavli of learning, of this fighting type of learning, a whole different style of learning, and they never gave up that style of learning and adopted the style of Toras Eretz Yisrael, which he talks about in several places. But we're supposed to come to Eretz Yisrael and sit down and learn and understand that what we're learning is the real Toras Chaim. How do I put on my tefillin in Eretz Yisrael? And on that, I said, I believe more than once, Rav Nebenzahl, Rav Meir Vassim Shona, one of the great tzaddikim of Ador. I met a Talmud of his last summer, the summer of 2019. We were talking. We had met because the two of us were asked to speak somewhere. I spoke before him. I spoke about the Ramban, and he was supposed to speak after me. Before he spoke, he came over to me and said, I want to tell you something, that the Ramban about Hatzivi Loch Tzion, and when the Ramban says the ikka place to be Shemet Torah mitzvahs is in Eretz Yisrael, and in Chutz La'aretz, the only reason you put on tefillin is so you don't forget that there's a mitzvah of tefillin, because Golus, after 2,000 years, you come back, what is this tefillin, what is this mezuzah? That's why you do it for 2,000 years. He said that Rav Nebenzahl himself, and tells his Talmidim that if you're in Chutz La'aretz on a particular day, and of course you put on your tefillin in Chutz La'aretz, if you get back to Eretz Yisrael that day and it's before Shkia, put on your tefillin again. Because the tefillin, he's taking the Ramban, he's not saying this is just like, this is not a shtickle nice Torah for the Shabbos table. Oh, it's so important to mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz, it's just a tzivu l'chatz yoyim. This is halacha. Based on the Ramban, he paskin that if you put on your tefillin in Chutz La'aretz, you're in England in the morning, you get on a plane, you come to Eretz Yisrael, so before Shkia, put on your tefillin again. Because the tefillin you put on that day earlier in Chutz La'aretz was hatziv l'chatz yoyim. It was just to remember that there's such a thing as tefillin. When you land in Eretz Yisrael, that's the ikka place to wear tefillin. It's a different mitzvah. It's an elevated standard. You need to put on your tefillin again. So this is what Rav Kook is addressing. Ein Torah k'Toras Eretz Yisrael. The level of there's nothing like studying Torah in Eretz Yisrael, and the level of there's nothing like studying Torah in the style, the noam, the pleasantness of Eretz Yisrael. So, having said that, Let's go to the last page. This was last week's scan. I know you got a new scan this week, but we started late and we had to finish the ratio share. So let's go back to last week's scan before we go to the new scan. This is last week's scan, the last page of it. It's page 481 in Rav Drovi's Pirish. The last paragraph in the right-hand corner, Rav Drovi quotes Rav Kook. Therefore, we have to, in Torah Eretz Yisrael requires us that we go into the depths, we plumb the depths of the Torah so that we can understand it, not as robots, but understand the depths of it, the beauty of it, how it's true, how it gives a person a moral life, an ethical life, a geschmacka life. We cannot teach Torah's Eretz Yisrael, the style of Eretz Yisrael, as do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. That's not pleasant. Torah's Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Chavdalet calls Talmidei Chacham in Bavel pleasant, Noam. The Talmidei Chachamim, those who study Torah, are called Noam, and they teach Torah Noam, pleasant. We're not going to go off and tell people, well, for Parah Aduma, we can tell you that's just what you have to do. But we want to teach people about Drachecha, Darchei Noam, V'chol Nesivaisecha Shalom. When we get closer to Hanukkah, we'll learn the last Rambam. We're learning the Gemara Hanukkah with the men. We'll talk about the last Rambam in Hilchos Hanukkah. The Rambam says at the end of Hilchos Hanukkah says, Kol HaTorah Kula Lo Nitna L'aseh Shalom Ba'olam. The whole Torah was given to the Jewish people so that they can make peace amongst the whole world, amongst all mankind. Shenema Dracher Dachei Noah. V'chol Nesivaisecha Shalom. That's the purpose of the whole Torah. Noyam, pleasantness. Now there's a time for Musar and there's a time for, don't say punishments, consequences. There's a time for these things. But Drachecha Dachei Noyam, the pathway of the Torah is pleasantness. And the Talmidei Chachamim Bavel, when Noyam, they understood this pleasantness. And that when they learned together and they taught with a pleasantness. What does a pleasantness mean? I want to show you why the Torah doesn't have to be shoved down your throat. And I'm not getting into the politics today of Kriya Datit and all that other stuff. We're not talking politics. We're talking now simply teaching people Torah. I'm not going to shove this down your throat. It leads to morality. It leads to ethical lifestyles. Ethical lifestyles. Morality means society is going to be peaceful with one another. It means that everybody's going to enjoy society more. It means everybody's going to enjoy life more. In order to teach this, we need to plumb the depths of the Torah, not a statutory law. We need to plumb the depths of the Torah and figure out how the Rabbeinu Shalom wanted, if you want to use the Ramchal Lashon, how the Rabbeinu Shalom wanted us to become better people. How is the neshama going to make the guf higher and elevated through the mitzvah of tzitzis? How is the neshama going to elevate the guf, which is the whole avodas Hashem, through the mitzvah of Shabbos? How are we going to do that? So we need to plumb the depths of these mitzvahs so that we can understand it ourselves and teach it to others how I can make your life better. I can improve life. If you just listen to me and study the Torah, you're going to have a better world, better life. So the next line says in the right-hand column, this, Rav Kook writes, cannot be felt and cannot be reached unless it's Eretz Yisrael. Rav Drovi explains, the connection between Torah's emes and Torah's chayim. There's something we call Torah's emes. Torah is objective truth, but it's also Torah's chayim. It's also a wellspring of life, because truth is a wellspring of life. Now, a lot of people don't like truth. When you introduce a sentence, you say, I want to tell you the truth. People take a step back and say, whoa, what does he mean he wants to tell me the truth? What is he, the harbinger of all truth? What is he, the master of truth? Hold on one second. People like to say, in my opinion. When you say, I want to tell you the truth, you're being aggressive. That's not the way you talk to people. People have their own opinions. For those who study postmodernism, you're not supposed to say, I want to tell you the truth. Because in the postmodern society, the postmodern philosophy, there is no truth. You have your truth, I have my truth. Don't tell me what the truth is. And that's why we have a society that looks the way it looks like. But besides Torah's emes, we also have to talk about Torah's chayim. It is a living Torah that gives you life. It makes life better for you and better for the world. It's impossible to fully feel and live mamish as a living thing, the Torah, only in Eretz Yisrael. Rak Be'eretz Yisrael, he gives us examples, Rav Dror, we have Meir Versum Shana. Rak Be'eretz Yisrael, Mafias Hanavor Ruach HaKodesh. Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh, he adds Ruach HaKodesh, is only in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara in Ma'ikotan says that Nevuah is only in Eretz Yisrael. And what about Yecheskel ben Buzi? The Gemara says Yecheskel ben Buzi, the first parak in Yecheskel, the Ma'aser Merkava at Nahar Kavor in Bavel. The Gemara asks the question. But the general rule is Nevuah is in Eretz Yisrael. Why is Nevuah only in Eretz Yisrael? A person is a tremendous goin b'Torah, he's a tremendous tzaddik, and whatever he is, he lives in Williamsburg. Now, there's no Nevuah today altogether. Nevuah ended with Malachi. But in the time when there was Nevuah, you have a tremendous Talmud Chacham, a tremendous tzaddik, and he's living in Kush, or he's living in Ashur. Why can't he be a Navi? He's got all the Torah knowledge. He's got all the tzidkis. He's got all the proper midas. If you want to get to that level of being a Navi, what does a Navi mean? He's gotten through his Torah and through his mitzvahs and through his midas, he's gotten so close to Hashem that Hashem talks to him or communicates with him. That's not going to happen except in Eretz Yisrael. So whatever you're doing in Chutz La'aretz can get you to a certain place. It's not going to get you to Nevuah. For that, the Gemara tells us, you need to be in Eretz Yisrael. There's something in Eretz Yisrael, the air, whatever it is, or we can call it Torah on steroids. Besides what you're learning, as you're learning Torah, Eretz Yisrael is working on you. We may not see it, we may not know it, but as you're learning and absorbing Torah in Eretz Yisrael, it converts into Torah's Eretz Yisrael, as we spoke about a few minutes ago. The Torah you learn in Eretz Yisrael gets some gravy thrown into it. By you merely sitting within the borders of Eretz Yisrael, it becomes not Torah, it's Torah's Eretz Yisrael. And Torah's Eretz Yisrael and being in Eretz Yisrael can lead a person to get so close to the Rebbeinu Shalom that the Rebbeinu Shalom communicates to him through Nevuah. We're not making this up. Rav Kook's not making this up. It's a Gemara in Ma'ikot Daf Chafei. Rak bon nitn lirois as kivras hapnim shel Hashem. Only in Eretz Yisrael, where a person can get so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is it possible for a person to see clearly the way the Ribono Shel Olam runs the world and how he runs history. You cannot live in Eretz Yisrael without understanding that every moment here has an amazing, beyond imagination, hashgacha pratis. Otherwise, you can't live here. If you live here without understanding of the mamish millisecond hashgacha pratis that makes it possible that we exist here in Eretz Yisrael after almost 2,000 years, then a person will have to be deaf, dumb, and blind. So in order to, if you want to get that closeness to the Ribono Shel Olam, we're doing this through Das Tavunas to understand how Hashem runs the world, how Hashem runs the history of the world, which is the new subject we started in the Ramchal, how to understand 0 to 6,000. If you want to understand those things, and you want to see how Ribono Shel Olam runs the world, these things can be understood in Eretz Yisrael. Because if you're in Eretz Yisrael, you feel it every second that the Ribono Shel Olam is running the world. And therefore, only in Eretz Yisrael can one reveal the true influences and feel the true influences and live the true influences of the Torah. So while a person is studying Torah in Eretz Yisrael, It's not just Torah. Eretz Yisrael is doing something. The oxygen in Eretz Yisrael, as you're learning, the oxygen in Eretz Yisrael or the air in Eretz Yisrael is doing something to that Torah and is lifting it up to a place where it couldn't be lifted up to in Chutz La'aretz. First Rashi and Chumash we learned today. Gracious. You must know that God created heaven and earth. He's the master of heaven and earth, and he carved up the world because the world is his. And he gave us Eretz Yisrael forever. Why do I need this story? Just give me a mitzvah. I'll give you plenty of mitzvahs. But those mitzvahs and the study of Torah will only come after you have a very clear understanding that the geographic location that belongs to the Jews where they are supposed to learn Torah, a Torah Ketorah is Eretz Yisrael, and where they're supposed to do mitzvahs, Hatzivlach Ziyonim, is in Eretz Yisrael. The first Rashi and Chumash incorporates these yesodis, these principles that we talked about. All Yidden that need Yeshua Shav Yeshuas, all Yidden need Refuah Shav Refuas, Refuah Shleima, Moshe Zelig, Ben Rezel, Psav Shachal Yisrael, all Yidden need Nechama Shav Nechamas, all Yidden need Baruch should have all the brachas that Baruch Shalom should give Klal Yisrael, all the brachas, Mishamal L'Amay Dayim Adalat Tzarseinu. Yeshua's Nechamas brachas refuahs can only come from the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Echad Yachad Miyuchad. It comes when he wants, how he wants, the who he wants, and through who he wants. But we do our ishtadlus, we do our work, which is a mitzvah, so that we can be healthy and safe. And through that, the Rebbeinu Shalom blesses those efforts. And this is a Gilui HaYichud when we understand this and internalize and live it, and especially when we internalize and live it in Eretz Yisrael, we bring about a Gilui HaYichud. And every person that brings about a Gilui HaYichud, the Gilui HaYichud reaches critical mass mamish today, and the Mashiach will come to finish it off, as we saw in the Mashal yesterday, the Ramchal of the big boulder where everybody has to chop off a piece of the boulder. Everybody, please take care of yourselves. Api the haros. I'm going to tell you a joke about the haros in a second. And Seichel Yosha, do what you need to do it how you need to do it, and in a seichel way, so that we remain healthy, well, so we can makabel Mashiach Tzidkenu mamish today. Amen. Now here's the joke. Let's see if it's a joke because it tells us. This is a news article that appeared yesterday. Now, the reason why governments impose fines is so that people will not violate the law. Some people violate the law. It's a serious thing. They put them in jail. Some things the government considers not serious enough to go to jail. And the government says you're going to pay a fine. You're speeding, you're going to pay a fine. You, for whatever reason, you didn't pango in the Merkaz, you're going to pay a fine. The point of the fine is so that a person will conduct his life in a way that he will avoid the fine. So, for example, if I knew that if I don't pango in to the Merkaz, I'm going to get a ticket on my car for 1 shekel, then I could care less about pango. It would make a difference in the world to me, because pango ends up costing more than the shekel. So I say, forget the pango. If I get a ticket, it's a shekel. If I don't get a ticket, I got away with it. By putting 100 shekel ticket on my window, I pango in. I don't want to get 100 shekel ticket. What's the purpose of a fine? So that a person will not want to pay the fine. The fine will be in such an amount that you will therefore not violate the law because you don't want to pay the fine. But if you make fines affordable, then there's no point in making the fine at all. So I read this yesterday. There was a debate in the coronavirus committee here in Eretz Yisrael about raising the fines. For example, if you have a wedding that you're not supposed to have with a certain number of people, the fine was 5,000 shekel. People were paying the fines. So they want to raise it to 10,000, right? 10,000, maybe people will think twice. Okay, so they raised it to 10,000. Yeshivas that are not allowed to be open were being fined 5,000 shekel. And they were willing to stay open in violation of the law because either the yeshiva paid for it or they found a wealthy parent to pay for it, but they kept the yeshivas going in violation of the law. The committee, when it considered raising the fine of weddings from 5 to 10,000, they were considering raising the knas, the fine for opening a yeshiva in violation of the law, from 5 to 10,000. So during the discussion in the ministerial committee, Minister Rabbi Yaakov Avitan of Shas objected to raising the fines on Torah institutions. And this is what he said. Imposing large fines on an educational institution that is not an economic business is bad. Where will the institution bring the money from? It will be imposed on the parents, where they will get, and where will the parents get the money from? Minister Avitan wondered. In other words, please don't increase the fine to 10,000 shekel, because while it's 5,000 shekel, the yeshivas can stay open in violation of the law. And Baruch Hashem, we have people that'll pay the 5,000. But if you're going to make the fine 10,000, we're not going to be able to afford to violate the law. So please keep the fine affordable. Now, this is a minister in the government who is sworn to uphold the laws of the country. And he's basically telling the committee, please keep the fines in an affordable place so that when we violate the law, we can afford to pay the fine. Chel, mamish chel. Please keep the fines affordable so that people can violate the law. Okay, so everybody, don't use chelm seichel, use seichel yasha. Protect yourselves, keep yourself safe. To greet Mashiach came here, Amen. The Rabbeinu Shloim is running the world. He's running every part of the world. He's running America. He's running it, every part of America, every district of America, every vote in America. It's Norva Oyim, what's going on there, here, there, everywhere. And the Rabbeinu Shloim is running this thing. And the Me'eretz Hashem, Mitam Poshet Hakoras HaToiv that we talked about. This is not a political statement. This is Hakoras HaToiv. We owe tremendous Hakoras HaToiv to President Trump for all he's done for Eretz Yisrael, for the people of Eretz Yisrael, for the safety of Eretz Yisrael. We wish him much success. Chok and Kavod L'Malchus. And as I mentioned, we learned in Midas, the eastern gate to the Har HaBayis was called Shushan Habira because the Persians gave us permission to build the Beis HaMikdash, and as Hakoras HaToiv, we put the eastern gate up and we put a picture of Shushan Habira on the eastern gate to the Har HaBayis. There's a chiyuv to be maketoiv. And we're maketoiv to the president, and we wish him much success today and in the coming days, in the coming months. The Rebbe Shalom should give him hatzlacha merubah, so he continue his work to help Yidden. Again, we're doing our hishtadlus. Everything comes from the Rebbe Shalom. The Rebbe Shalom should do what he sees fit for the best of Klal Yisrael. And we have Hakoras HaToiv for what the Rebbe Shalom did by bringing us the president. And the president should continue to have much success. And he should have much hatzlach in the coming days and months ahead of him. Everybody have a wonderful day. Zay Gezah.